This is a Likuti Sichot, one of the speeches that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave early in his time. Let's see, where does this come from? It comes from, let's see, 1950. 1 second, 1 minute. Excuse me. Yeah, 1950. Well, here it says 1950, 1951. It was given 1950 and 1951. All right. The commandments of the Torah are divided into 3 categories. There are commandments which are mishpatim, some are called edus, and some are called chukim. Generally speaking, mishpatim are logical commandments, like don't kill. Edut are religious commandments. And chukim are commandments that make no sense, no religious sense, no normal sense. The Rebbe will explain it a little bit differently. The chiluk, the difference between a zayder, b'nogia, regarding the differences is in regarding to seichel v'havana, understanding. How understandable the commandments are. Mishpatim, these are a zoyna mitzvah, such commandments was oich der mensch, which menschliche seichel was also human intellect, is mechayev, obligates you. Oh, as mizol zayin tam, that we should do. Right? Don't kill, don't steal, honor your parents. Huh? These are things that are done almost in every normal society. Right? Normal society. Edus, these are commandments, was seichel alayin voltze taka nit mechoyev. A person wouldn't come to these commandments on his own. Aber noch dem, but after the Torah tells us to do them, the ungezogt as haben sie auf sich a seichel dika erklären. They have a logical understanding. Like eating matzah on Passover. On your own, you wouldn't think, let's do this on our own. Putting tefillin on your arm, on your head. Who would think of doing such a thing on his own? Right? Doing exactly that. So this is a commandment from God. Why? Because Passover reminds us that we were slaves in Egypt. The tefillin reminds us that we should use our heart and our mind for God. It's a little bit logical. Chukim, but laws which are called chukim, those are such commandments, but in nite oivzei kain shum erklären. There's no understanding in logic at all. And even more, ze seinen noch verkehrt v'seichel. Sometimes the commandments are opposite understanding. Und der kiyum from ze chukim mitzvahs, and the commandments from these chukim commandments is only with Kabbalat all. You do it only with Kabbalat all. An example: a Jew should not marry a non-Jew. What's wrong with non-Jews? What's wrong with non-Jews? Non-Jews are there's a lot of non-Jews that are, personality is much better than Jews, right? And people find the attraction to one another, and they're compatible. Why shouldn't they get married? Why shouldn't they get married? I know somebody, even more, that a Kohen is not supposed to get married to a woman that's a divorcee. And I know a couple that they were married, and then they became religious. And it was discovered that she had been divorced, and he was a Kohen. And now they got along together. What should they do? They have to get divorced. Now, that doesn't make any sense. That's against understanding. Against sense. What can you do? It's a chok. It's a law of the Torah that's what you have to do. But that's what you have to do. It's not another law is a mamzer. There's a lot of laws like that make absolutely no sense. Right? A woman that wasn't divorced, and she had relations with a Jew, and the baby that's born is called a mamzer, and he can never marry a Jewish woman. You can never marry Jewish. There's loopholes and things like that, but not talking about that. That doesn't make any sense. Why? That's a chok. Doesn't make any sense. Not only does it not make any sense, it goes against sense. Goes against sense. It's blood. Really, essentially, all the commandments are that way. All the commandments are that way. And if you look at it, all of life is that way. All of life is that way. No one understands what life is. No one understands why we feel this way, we don't feel that way. Why a person is attracted to this, he's repelled by this. That's just nature. Nature means things you don't understand. Nature is, you can understand maybe a little bit about the way things work, but why things work. Right? The people, all those that tried to understand, they failed miserably. Right? They may fail miserably. Freud and those people, right? They can just sort of rearrange things. But basically, life is not understandable. That doesn't give an excuse, explain that it's okay, the Torah, the commandments, because that doesn't make an excuse. But just saying that there are commandments that make no sense. And the commandments that make no sense, we're going to see in some ways, that really reflects on God. Because the fact that God exists makes no sense. And the only way we can really attach ourselves to the fact that there's a creator and that we're just creations, like we just finished learning, is by emunah, by faith. Okay, let's not get too much into this. Let's continue. And there's eidos chukim, there's eidos mishpatim and chukim. Chukim are laws that not only do they make no sense, but they're the opposite of understanding. That's what this means. You do it only because God said. That's why you do it. Am I going to get a benefit? Not necessarily. What am I? I'm going to go to heaven? Could be, maybe. You're doing it only because God said. Right? I'm only losing. Right? You have to close your store on Shabbat. I make 2/3 of my income is on Shabbat. I can't do it. You have to do what God says. Right? You do it. What's my reward? There's rewards, but that's not so interesting. The rewards. And the biggest reward is I can do what my creator wants. Who says there's a creator? No. You start to do what he wants, you'll start to feel him. Thus says this means, as the mitzvahs, the commandments from these type of commandments, which are called mishpatim, which are logical, or edus, which are like religious, are sort of logical. Zayin vida ratzon elyon. This is what God wants. That he, so to speak, contracted himself in angetan and seichel. The commandments, which we do understand, they're no less godly than the ones that are not understandable. Right? The commandment, don't kill, that's just a commandment. We're doing it only because God said not to kill. It happens to be that God also put it into our mind that we can understand that if people kill, there won't be society, there won't be order, there won't. Maybe he'll kill me. Everybody's going to be in fear all the time. Everybody has to get armed. And as understand that, but God sometimes he contracts his infinite wisdom in a way that we can even understand it, in such a way that the understanding from a human being, Zozain Kenan, the Graven, that we can understand a commandment of God, that we can understand God's commandment. Andrish is the Sugri Chukim, which is not the case with the commandment which is called Chukim, the incomprehensible commandments. Vuder Ratzon, the upper will of God, even below, when it's in this world, it doesn't contract itself. It's like pure godliness. You do it only because God said. And it remains only just God's will. Oh, so all the other commandments, let's say, for instance, again, not killing, right? Why don't I kill? Because God said. But also because if I do kill, maybe I'll regret it. Maybe the police will catch me. Maybe I'll miss. I'll shoot, I'll miss. Maybe he'll kill me. Maybe his family will take revenge on me. So there's all these reasons not to kill. So if you kill only because God says not to do it, you can never be sure if that's really the reason you did it. Only because you're serving God, which is not the case with chukim. Chukim are laws that you do only because God commands. Okay, there's also peer pressure and things you do it because you're religious and you don't ask any questions anyway. But ideally, the idea of a chukim reveals God more than the other. Und weil, because the chukim, these are laws in below, and they reveal only just God's will. That's only the reason we're here. So therefore, it's connected with God's essence, which therefore, therefore, can as nit upgekommen, it cannot come into intellect. It's so, the chukim are commandments that are so high that it's revealing godliness in the world in a way that it's pure godliness, and you can't understand God. Therefore, darf euch der Mensch, a person, should do the commandments, and because mekayim zayin the chukim, you have to do the commandments with what's called kabbalat ol. Kabbalat ol means the essence will of yourself. Una bittel, and a negation versus verbunden, which is connected with the essence of the soul. Was this hecher from kochos apenimim, which is higher than any inner powers. This was the big battle also with Chabad against Napoleon. The first Rebbe of Chabad was a very big opponent of Napoleon, and everybody liked Napoleon. Even the other religious Jews, they liked Napoleon. Even the just religious leaders, they liked Napoleon. Why? Because Napoleon wanted to make everything understandable. Napoleon wanted to make everyone's friends and we're all equal, right? Eternity, what is it? The fraternity, equality, and liberty. Oh, liberty, and we're all free. And there was nothing and no one is going to tell us what to do. There are philosophers, they'll explain, but no more kings. That's the point. No more kings. That was Napoleon's big thing. No more kings. There's not going to be kings. Now, the fact is the kings were very evil. The kings were very bad guys. But to be without kings was much worse. Why? Because when you're without kings, then everybody's a king. I'm a king. Everyone's a king. Therefore, you don't do anything because you're told to. You don't do anything because it's right. You do what you understand. You don't do things you don't want to do. That's the point. You don't do things that you don't want. You only do what you want to do. That's what Napoleon said. That's what Korach said also. Just everyone's holy. Everyone calls the shots. There's no more kings. Says the Rebbe, that's not Judaism. That's not Judaism. Judaism is that you do everything because God said. And there's things that you also understand. That's a bonus. And it's a commandment to understand. Another bonus. And it's a commandment that you're supposed to understand, try to understand, even the chukim, even the laws which are not understandable, but you're doing why you're trying to understand, not because I want to be the boss, because God is commanding me to understand. So it says, when a person does that, if you live your whole life only doing what you want, you never reveal the true essence of your soul, namely that which is not understandable. It'll come out that everything you do will be dependent on some sort of logic. There won't be anything like true love. You won't be able to love someone just because of the other person's goodness, right? You won't be able to love a person if you don't want to. Like there's the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. I don't like my neighbor. You should love your neighbor as though he is yourself. Why should I do that? Because God said. I don't believe in God. He says, oh, if you don't, then the world becomes smaller. It becomes smaller, right? It becomes, you don't open up that aspect of your soul which can devote itself to truth. Maybe we can call that conscience, love. Professor Viktor Frankl talks about this a lot. But here the Rebbe is talking about this in relation to not just humanity, but in relation to God. But Derech Efshar, ideally the non-Jews, they have what's called 7 Noahide commandments, that they're supposed to do them only because God says in the Torah. That's the only motivation. Not to get into heaven and not to get into, supposed to do because God said in the Torah. And then you can do it to get into heaven, whatever you want. But Derech Efshar, maybe we can say, as das is the oich der bir, that's the explanation from the Alter Rebbe's explanation, what he says, chukim, the word chukim, these laws which are not understandable, chukim, from the language of chakika. What's chakika means? Carved out, oisgerkritzt. And the yisron from chakika, the advantage from carved out letters on written letters was by chakika, letters that are carved out, they are the osius mine, the letters are not a separate thing from the material that they're carved into. They're one thing. The letters are the absence of the thing that they're carved into. Zezain and nit kain besundere mitzias, they're not a separate thing on their own from their zach, from the thing on which they are carved into. Like kativa, when a person writes something, let's say you write a Torah, you write a Sefer Torah, you write on parchment, so the letters, maybe they get soaked in, but they're not one with it, they can be erased. By kativa, when a person writes a letter, as zayin and osios, the letters are zugegeben a zach, an additional thing to the parchment on which they are written. Und das is oich der oiftu. That's the, which is not the case chukim when a letter is carved out. It's one. That's the advantage of chukim and eros and mishpatim. Eros and mishpatim. This is from God's upper will, which is was in ze, which in them, usai mitzad them adam, was is mekayim. Whether we're talking about the person who does the commandments which are not understandable, they're pure godliness, is faran atzuga kumanazach, is tzuga kumanazach, a person that does the commandments because of some understanding. So he's something, and the commandment is something, and God is something. This is harkava from, it's a combination of intellect and understanding. So when he does the commandment, he's doing it because, which is not the case when the commandments are chukim, that are carved out, not understandable. There's no logic behind it. The only because is, I'm doing it because God says. What are you going to get out of it? What logic is behind it? That's what God says, this is what I do. As far bin sich, etzem and neshama, the essence of the soul is connected with the essence of God. On their cover without any combination of intellect and knowledge. So in other words, all the other commandments do not testify so much on the existence of God as the chukim do. A person can always say, listen, the other religions, they also have their, their signs and their rituals and their things, and, not kill. All, even non-religious people don't kill and don't steal, right? They also have their morals and their ideas. But chukim testify God. Why am I doing it? Because that's what God said. The Ikarin, the main thing from chukim, is the commandment from Para Aduma. That's the main example. V'es verder tzil, like it's told in the Midrash, as Oich Shlomo Melech, even King Solomon, which King Solomon was the highest, smartest person in the world. He was masik given the he could understand the highest ideas. Oich ditamim, he could understand also the reason from the chukim, from all the other laws which are called chukim. He could understand the ideas, like we said, about mamzer and all these other things. Hot Ergezok, said, I'll call Elu Amarti, and all of the other commandments of the Torah, even the ones that were not understandable, I was able to understand. Some sort of spiritual, the Kabbalistic idea you could get. Parsha Shel Paraduma, but this commandment of the red cow, Chakarti v'shalti pishpashti, I looked and I searched. And Bishpashti, Valmarti, Achachma, he said, I searched, I thought I would obtain wisdom, Vehi Rechoka Mimeni, and it is far away from me. I thought I would be wise, and the commandment of the red cow proved that I'm not wise. There's a wisdom which is far beyond mine, and that is the wisdom behind the red cow. As hat geparstet, gefarscht und gesucht, that he tried to search and examine the reason for para aduma, und hat sie nicht gekannt begreifen. And he couldn't understand it, couldn't get to it. Nor to Moshe Rabbeinu. It says that by Moses, God revealed the reason. L'cha ani magaleh, to you I will tell the secret of the red cow. What's the big secret of the red cow? What's so secret about the whole thing? We'll find out in a moment. But mainly, what big secret of the red cow is that the whole thing doesn't make any sense. The idea that a person can become impure in Judaism makes no sense. What does impure mean? Well, he doesn't smell differently, doesn't look differently. He doesn't feel. Say that when people became impure, they became a little more depressed. There was a little less life. They were like closer to death a little bit, and so that they felt. But generally, impurity doesn't make any sense, right? A person happens to be touched or touches a dead body, he doesn't even know. He's in a room where there's a dead body, or a house where there's a dead body. He's impure. For the rest of his life, he can't go into the Holy Temple. He happened to walk over a grave. He didn't know it was a grave. He's impure the whole rest of his life. Doesn't make any sense. How do you become pure? No problem. You take a red cow that's pure and you slaughter it outside of the camp. You put it into water. You sprinkle it on the person on the third day and the seventh day. And then because what type of a thing is that? It doesn't make any sense. The whole business doesn't make any sense. It says this commandment is the ideal nonsensical commandment. And God revealed the reason only to Moses. Das ist euch einer from the Talmud. This is one of the reasons why the red cow is called the sum total of the Torah. That's why it says in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, it says Zot Chukat Torah. Zot Chukat Torah. It doesn't say Zot Chukat Ha-Para. This is the statute of the Torah. It doesn't say this is the statute of how to become refined, pure, or of the para. Because all of the commandments of the Torah, and also the religious ones, the Eidos and the Mishpatim, the main thing is that you're doing the commandments only because it's God's will, which is above understanding, totally. Me is nor was der Ratzon, just that God decided that he could, in some of the commandments, that they could be understandable. But the main thing in all of the commandments of the Torah is we're doing what God wants. That's what God wants. That's why it's so necessary to listen to the rabbis, and that's why it's necessary to define what a rabbi is. But the rabbis, they're the ones that explain exactly all the details. The godliness is in the details. They explain what God really meant. For instance, in the Torah, it doesn't say you have to put on tefillin. It says you have to put on a sign on your arm and a totafot between your eyes. What is a sign? What's that? What is a totafot? What does it mean? And so the rabbis came and said, this is what God told Moses. This is what it's supposed to be. So all these details are not the rabbis and they're not Moses. It's pure God. And that God is creating us. And this is even higher than the creation. This is pure God. When we bow them, because the commandment of the paraduma is revealed. One second. And because that the commandment of the red cow is, this is revealed, that it's pure will of God. Room by paraduma, because by paraduma is the will of God, not clothed in any understanding. Therefore, the paraduma, when it introduces it in our Torah portion, says this is the law of the Torah. It doesn't say this is the law of the para or the law of purity or whatever, because the whole Torah can be symbolized by the and is exemplified by the paraduma. Paraduma is the one commandment which is pure godliness. The only reason we do it is because God said to do it, and that really should be our motivation for all the commandments. Okay, what is the amazing thing in paraduma? What is the amazing thing? Metame es a tahorim, umetayer es a tameim. And nasit michutz lamachane. Two things that are unusual about the paraduma is that the Kohen that sprinkles the I'm sorry, all the people that are involved in the process of making the paraduma, except for the one who sprinkles. He's the only one. Everyone who involved in the process of making the ashes of the paraduma, they become impure. They become impure. So they refine, they purify the one who's impure. They refine. The one that's impure becomes pure, and the ones that purify him, they become impure. Right? It defiles those who work with the person to become pure. And so the impure one becomes pure, and the ones who make him pure, somehow or other, they become impure. That doesn't make any sense. It's like saying the doctor, every time he heals someone, he gets sick. They're there to make this person pure. The one who is impure, they sprinkle the ashes on. They make the ashes, and they become impure. Why? That's number one question. Number two, it's the only sacrifice which is made outside of the camp. It's a sacrifice, and it's made outside of the camp. Therefore, it's understood. By means of these things, will be revealed the connection between the essence of our soul, which is chakika. All these steps are not understandable. Also, the reveals when we do the red cow, we learn about it. It reveals the essence of our soul, and in them besteht klaus in the Torah, and that, in fact, is the whole idea of the Torah. Them koach of them, the ability to do this, we receive from Moses. Was to him that Moses, he received the secret of the paraduma. On ergate them koach, and he has the power this power to all the Jews. Okay, therefore it says vayikhu elecha. That's where God said to Moses, "You take to yourself the red cow." The red cow was taken through Moses. Now Moses is as incomprehensible as the para aduma is. Moses looks like a normal person, just like everybody else. He had a wife, he had children, right? He ate, he slept, he had a house, he had a place where he lived, but he was totally unlike anybody else. Totally. The same thing, the paraduma. Paraduma was a cow, like any other cow, like all the other commandments, but it was totally incomprehensible. That's also what the Jews are. The Jews seem to be like a nation like everybody else, but they're totally incomprehensible. So it says that the red cow comes to purify the Jews. Where do we get the power from? From Moses. Chachas bapoel hat sich mit der para mit asek gewen Elazar a Kohen, even though the one who did the para was Elazar a Kohen. Now the koch, because the power and to do this then what came through Moses, when a zoy oich is speter de gedoras, and also in the later generations, the olam inikras al shemecha, the para will always be called the red cow of Moses. Bizas oich the acht paros, all the eight. It says Moses made the first paraduma. 8 more were made in the second temple, Bayit Sheni, 8 more. On oich the center, and also the 10th one, which will be made by means of the Moshiach, he'll make it. They'll all be called benus, which will be made in order to purify all the Jewish people and purify especially the Kohanim that will work in the Holy Temple. The Ephar Apara will be Moshe. All of them will partake of the. It says that there were 9 red cows that were made up to now. Each one of them had a little bit of the ashes of the first cow that Moses made. And Mashiach will come, he'll make the 10th one, as the ashes from the paraduma are in the ark that Moses made. It'll be added on to the ashes of the paraduma that Mashiach will make. So in other words, the red cow, which seems to be just another commandment, and maybe not such an important one because we don't really understand it. And it says the Rebbe, that's the essence of all the commandments. It's a commandment that's done that takes away death. It's a commandment that you cannot possibly understand. And that's really the essence of the whole Torah. The whole Torah comes to take away death. And that It's not understandable. And that we can't understand that, that's even a bigger miracle. And it's all in the merit of Moses. It's all in the merit of this one person called Moshe. And this one person called Moshe is a totally different human being from any of the other human beings that are going to be, except for Mashiach. Mashiach will be greater, and that we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Here we go.